Hello, I'm Shelly Terrell, and today I'm joined by Anne Fox, who is a freelance teacher and consultant based in Denmark. She's also the tutor for our upcoming podcast module. And today we're going to talk to her about one of the great things she does, which is being the co-host of the Absolutely Intercultural podcast. So, Anne, can you tell us a little about when you began the podcast and a little bit of the history behind it?
Hi, Cheryl. Hi, Shelley. I knew you were going to ask me that, and I must admit I had to look it up because it's such a long time ago. We started in 2006, in March 2006, and the way it happened was that I was part of a project where we were devising materials for teachers of adults in Europe to include intercultural aspects in their everyday practice. This wasn't just language teachers, it was any subject. And we'd heard this buzz about podcasts, and during the meeting which we held in Spain, we sort of we scheduled time to talk about this and say, what is this all about, podcasts, and is it something we could use? And there was me, who was willing to be part of it, and another of the partners, Laurent Borgman in Germany. And Laurent did say this is going to affect our lives very deeply if we go into this, and he was right. And we decided that we would put out a podcast which would be about all things intercultural, and that it would go out once every 2 weeks. We thought about that quite carefully, what would be too much for us, what would be too little for the listeners, and so on. So March 2006, I think we put out the first podcast about 2 weeks after making the decision. So, and I was unprepared. I didn't even have a microphone. So I had to say to my partner in Germany, excuse me, can you do the second show as well, because I haven't got the microphone yet. But as from show 3, I managed to be the other half of the podcast. So that was the inspiration, that we were doing work to try and encourage teachers to include intercultural aspects in their teaching. But really our brief is very wide, and I think especially me, because I'm not tied to big groups of students and groups of students that I see for a long period at a time, and I tend to interpret the brief very, very widely indeed. So it's been everything from going places in Second Life to, for example, how a Kenyan woman felt about being pregnant in Germany. The answer to that one was that she felt really, really overprotected compared to what life was like in Kenya for pregnant women. So, yeah, that was the inspiration.
Now, you have really interesting topics and guests. Why do you enjoy podcasting? And can you tell us also a little about how someone who's interested in podcasting, what tools or resources helped you to begin such a successful podcast?
Well, it's not too difficult, and in fact it's getting easier all the time. There are 2 basic ways of doing it. You either meet somebody face to face and record a conversation, or you do what we're doing at the moment, which is you get together in something like Skype and record the Skype conversation. So those are the 2 different ways of doing it. And as I say, it's become much easier over the years. Everybody, for example, not everybody, but almost everybody carries a mobile phone, and most mobile phones do record audio. And if you don't believe me, I would just ask anybody to really take a good look at their mobile phone, because it's not always obvious, but it's there. I mean, I have a really basic mobile phone at the moment. I don't do any podcasting on it, but even this one, you can record on it, so it's become much easier. What's the most enjoyable thing about it? I would say it's a jolly good excuse to get in touch with people. I've talked to an amazing array of people, and I would never have had any reason to get in touch with these people whatsoever if it wasn't for the podcasting. So I would say that that's the most enjoyable part. The least enjoyable part is probably the editing, but I won't talk about that.
And, well, how do you get your people that you interview for this? I mean, because there's such a wide array with it being intercultural. I mean, how would you find, for example, the woman in Kenya? How do you do this? Do people suggest them or?
Well, we invite people. We showcase the blog. We showcase the podcast on a blog, and we invite people to get in touch with us if they have a good idea and if they want to take part. Generally, it's people we know. So actually, the Kenyan woman who was pregnant, this is somebody who was in the project network. So that's how I knew her. Other people, for example, I just read about them in the newspaper and I get in touch with them.
Wow.
There was a woman who had a 6-part series on Danish television, and her project was to get immigrants and Danes talking to each other, and she did that by arranging a massive dinners all over the country. So she got people to sign up, and she paired them up, and then she got them to decide which part of the meal they were going to cook, and then they went and visited each other and had a meal. It was a fantastic initiative, and I just got in touch with her, and I was lucky enough that she said yes. So some of it is my initiative, some of it is people we know already, some of it is people who get in touch with us. So, for example, I've featured a couple of times Shelly Terrell, who's started something called the University of the People, which is basically free higher education for anybody. And it's a wonderful initiative, and he got in touch with me, and I thought, yeah, this is quite interesting, and so we went ahead. So it happens in a number of ways.
And now we're going to talk a little about the technology behind podcasting. What specific tools would you recommend for someone who wants to begin podcasting? Like, what are some of the technology that they might have to know or have to use, that even online resources?
Well, basically you need something to record the conversation, and you need something to edit the conversation, because scripted conversations are not very interesting for people. So you make a choice. You either have something which is scripted and which doesn't need much editing, or you have something which is unscripted but which then probably needs editing. So you need something to record and you need something to edit. No, I showed my phone earlier. It's not what I use, I have to admit, because the quality isn't very good. I think the quality of recording on mobile phones has actually got much better. And if you had a modern smartphone, then that would probably be more than adequate. But, and as I said before, things have got better. So I do have 2 dedicated recorders, which I bought for quite a lot of money, actually. They were about $300 each. But I don't think you need that anymore. I mean, I still use them because I have them, but I honestly think that the mobile phone is enough. And then for editing, the free software Audacity is great. It's just what I need. I don't need anything more. And I know that there's a free editor that comes on Macs as well, which I haven't tried, but I'm sure is just as good, if not better, than Audacity. So you don't really need very much. I suppose the last thing is, if you're going to use Skype like we're doing now, then you need something to record Skype. And I use Pamela. It's a paid version, but it only cost me about $30, so that wasn't a lot, and it was a one-off thing. And now I know that you can get 15 minutes at a time of recording with Pamela free, so you can actually do without paying for it. So those are the 3 basic things, then the Pamela recorder, the Audacity, and something to record the audio with, which could be your phone.
And what would be your tip about people who have podcasts who want to get the word out and expand their readership?
Well, it's free to have your podcast featured in iTunes, and that's a great place to get your podcast known. Also, you've got something like Podomatic, which is free and which does all the hard work for you about sharing the new shows that you've made. And I quite like Posterous as well, which is a sort of easy blog tool. And all you have to do there is you have to upload your audio file to post at posterous.com, and miraculously it gets posted, and voila, you have a podcast. So those are the ones that I would recommend. And of course, I mean, obviously you can shout about it in Twitter and Facebook and so on, and get a network going. But a lot can happen quite automatically if you use these sorts of tools.
And finally, how do you keep your podcast? I mean, it's since 2006. How do you keep it interesting?
Oh, that's a really good question, and I'm not sure it's for me to judge. I think it's for the audience to judge. And I mean, we welcome comments, we welcome feedback, and we welcome suggestions. So if somebody's got a brilliant idea about what we could do, then we're open to suggestion. How do we keep it interesting? I'm not sure. I think partly on my side is because I keep the brief quite wide. So I think that's part of it, that I do interpret it quite widely. But I mean, I keep my eyes open, see what's happening on blogs and see who people are talking about, and just keep my eyes open. But I mean, what we're doing is it's, how can I put it? We're not making a sort of class exercise or anything like that. We're just trying to record some interesting conversations. But you can use the podcast medium to do what you like, really. And if you want to post some exercises, some listening exercises, you could do that. So you can make it. It's even more varied and has more potential than we are using it for at the moment.
And do you have any last tips for those wanting a successful, long-lasting podcast?
Well, I'm not sure that you have to look at it in that way, actually. You don't have to say, oh, this is going to last for 10 years. I mean, it could be an academic year. It could be a semester. It could be even shorter than that. It depends on what your aims are. I would say that you should try and publicize it. I've got bee in my bonnet at the moment about having an audience. I'm talking about schoolwork now. I'm talking about learning. I'm talking about education. And I'm talking about turning homework into something which is a bit more real. And you do that by having an audience. And it's amazing how careful people will be once they know that somebody's listening. Yeah. So, I think the audience is probably the thing to get in place. And it doesn't have to be the whole wide world. This is another thing that I got to be in my bonnet about. I mean, when you talk to people and you say, oh, put this out, put out what you do, and they get really frightened, say, oh no, we don't want everybody watching this or listening to this. But I mean, you can password protect and then just make sure that the password goes out to trusted people. But audience, I think, is key.
Well, thank you so much for joining us. And I think another thing that you've shown is to have fun with it, because you seem like you have a lot of fun with it. So thank you so much for joining us.
Pleasure.